Right, hello everyone, welcome back to Britannic, Patroness of the Mediterranean, which is an interactive museum experience about the HMHS Britannic, which is His Majesty's hospital ship Britannic, which was one of the three Olympic-class liners made at the start of last century, which unfortunately had the distinction of sinking along with its very famous sister ship, the Titanic. This particular program that I'm using, Britannic Patroness of the Mediterranean, is an experience that's been published by Titanic Honor and Glory, the makers of a game of the same name, which hasn't been released yet. It's still in development. But they are a wonderful. They're wonderful developers and also wonderful historians as well. They do a lot of great information on their website and on their YouTube channel as well. The links to their website, to the Steam page for this game, and their YouTube channel are all in the description below. In yesterday's video that I did, we took a look at the HMHS Britannic and the differences between how the ship should have been as the RMS Britannic and how the ship actually was as the HMHS Britannic, the hospital ship, and the differences were striking. Anyway, today we are in the HMHS Britannic and we are going to be going through the sinking in real time. So this is going to be a long video. But we're going to do it from a first person perspective. And there is a lot of stuff to point out in the free cam version, but everything that could be said has already been done in an excellent way on Titanic Honor and Glory's YouTube channel. They do a real-time sinking documentary of the sinking of the Britannic, which has testimony from the survivors. So the reason I'm doing this in a kind of pause video at the moment is because the sinking starts relatively quickly as the simulation starts, and only then do we have some time to talk up. So we are going to go ahead and get to it. So I'll take this off and we'll show us in game. Things are a little bit loud actually, so let's start off with just halving the volume slightly. Alright, perfect. Okay, so yeah, as soon as the black screen fades, we will be on board the HMS Britannic. The day is the 21st of November 1916. It is the middle of the First World War. We are in the Mediterranean off the coast of Greece. That is Kea Island over there. And the current time is 9 minutes past 8 in the morning. So we are on the bridge, and I guess we can... so the captain of this ship is Captain Bartlett, and you'll see some certain things that, you know, shows that we're in the Second World War. Namely, this is a hospital ship, so if we head downstairs, you know, you see some of the infirmaries for the transporting the patients from the war zones in Europe back home for further treatment. And yeah, so what happened to the Britannic? The Britannic sank, and it didn't strike any natural phenomenon. It was struck by a mine laid by a German submarine whose number evades me, but it was part of the reason why mines and mine technology is banned nowadays in many countries is purely because mines are indiscriminate. And this is a hospital ship with, you know, no gun emplacements. It is not a combat ship. It is purely here as a medical resource, and we can't quite see it from where we are now, but we are flying the red claw cross, which signifies this as a hospital ship and it should not be attacked. But underwater mines don't care, and unbeknown to Captain Bartlett and the crew of the HMHS Britannic, is they are now less than a minute away from hitting an undersea mine, which will send this ship to the bottom of the seafloor within an hour. So I believe we've not got very long left. So throughout this video, we'll look at some of the things that happened during the sinking. And we've got this nice first-person perspective to experience it from. And yeah, we'll talk about some of the things that went wrong and some of the things that went quite right. So directly underneath me, you see the water come up, and you can see the ship is now rocking from side to side. We've struck the mine, and beneath us, the ship is sinking at now quite a rapid rate. Although this is a huge ship, so it doesn't necessarily look like it. So the mine struck below the forward well, which is just a little bit behind what I'm looking at in the middle of the screen now, and it caused extensive damage, so much so that, you know, whereas the Titanic sank in 2.5 hours, 2.25 hours, this ship would sink in a little over 55 minutes. So the ship's currently on full speed. You can see the engine order telegraphs are all to full, and you can see that the engines are engine RPM is set to ahead full. At the moment, at the time that the ship struck the mine, Captain Bartlett was on the bridge, and he's now evaluating what's happened. So the engines have now been put to all stop. That will be confirmed by the engine room. You can see the engine room still says that they're on full power. And so what happens, I explained this in the video, engine order telegraphs, this is basically the way that they work, is the handle on top is the signal that you want to send to whatever room, and the arrow at bottom is the signal that's there. So the engine room's now reported engines all stop. And very soon you will see the engine RPM start to come down. So yeah, this is it starting to come down. And the one thing that you will see is that the right hand engine is slowing down a lot faster than the port engine on the left side. They are both coming to a stop as instructed, but the right engine's coming down a lot faster. One thing that's happening now is obviously the captain's realised the severity of the situation. He's ordered the watertight doors to be closed, and he's ordered a distress signal to be sent. At this point, they don't know if they've hit a mine or if there is a submarine somewhere off them, and they're about to get another torpedo. The alarm goes off as they realise that the watertight doors are too significantly damaged in several compartments to be closed. So between two of the boiler rooms and the fireman's tunnel, they cannot be closed. So the ship's whistle now blows 4 times to indicate to all members of the crew to go to their action stations, as it were. This isn't a military ship, but this is the kind of general alarm to signal that they are required to start mustering the people, the passengers, and the nurses, the patients, to the lifeboats. So the captain, I don't know what we're doing here. So yes, we're going to see something soon. So the reason why it's necessary to send the signals through the ship's horn is that this ship is massive. It is, you know, for the time, it's just under a kilometre long. So the people at the front, the people in the dining room, have realised that they've hit something. They've felt the jolt, and it's alerted them to do what they need to do. So you can see one of the things we talked about in depth yesterday was the massive increase in lifeboats over the Titanic. That'll come into play later on. But with this ship being so large, people further back in the ship actually have barely felt a thing. So at this point, until the ship blew on its horn 4 times, activating everyone to their muster stations. I think it's called the general alarm, and it's basically, to be prepared to abandon ship. That's why it's necessary to blow the horn 4 times. Basically, these ships are so big, you're just not going to feel that damage everywhere. So, what's happening here is, let me come upstairs. So what's happening here is that the engines are now stopped. So the boiler rooms, which were creating a lot of steam, they're still really hot, and that steam is now getting discharged, both because in order to get rid of the boiler pressure, but also what's happening, the inflowing water into the boiler room is mixing with the hot coals, turning to steam, and is escaping from the smoke funnels, which is why we're seeing it up here. The steam vents, you can see, are these pipes just behind it, and they're to prevent boiler explosions. So, I don't know if this has happened yet. No, okay. Fine, so we'll save that for later. Unlike the Titanic, I'm still very fascinated by the history of the Britannic, but I know a lot less about it than the sinking of the Titanic. So, I've got to do a lot of learning here as well. So, at this point, what's happening is that some of the lifeboats are getting lowered. So what Captain Bartlett has done is he has ordered the lifeboats to be manned and have them put over the side, but not launched. Because at this point he's unsure, 1, if there's any help nearby, and 2, if the ship is actually going down or if it is just heavily damaged. So he wants to be ready, obviously mindful of everything that happened with the Titanic, but he doesn't want to be too brash with his decision making. So what he's done is he has spoken to the radio operators and got them to send out a distress message, which has been sent out, and it's been received by several military and civilian ships in the area. But the Britannic doesn't know that. They've never heard any signals back to say that their distress message has been received. And unbeknownst to them, the giant radio antenna, which spans the length of the 2 main masts here, has actually been severed in 2. So if you see here, you see the kind of triangle of wires at the top there. That's the radio antenna, which should be carried all the way behind the ship, and it's just not there anymore. And already, less than 10 minutes after the mine hit, you can see, looking at the screen here, the ship is already listing heavily to starboard, quite a fair bit. And this listing is actually going to shape some of the events that happen in the very near future. So the way of understanding how quickly the Britannic sank was that at this point, 10 minutes after the sinking, the Britannic is now at the same stage of sinking as the Titanic was 1 full hour into its sinking, because the Titanic had an iceberg that cut through the hull, whereas the mine has produced a gaping hole into the hull of the Britannic, and it's now compounded with issues of the watertight doors not closing, and I'm going to leap overboard in a massively unrealistic fashion, but there's no way to tilt into the free camera. So you can see the red line of the very base of the hull is now quite well underwater. And these portholes here, it's not shown in this, but these portholes, many of them are actually open. So we are in the Mediterranean. It's very hot. I think it's 21 degrees outside this morning. And being in a giant metal box, the ship got very hot. So against standing orders, many of the nurses needed to air out the wards and open the portholes. And these portholes were all left open as the ship started sinking. And so, as you can see, you know, we're getting quite close to the water level being into these portholes. And when that happens, the rate of flooding is going to get worse and worse. So I'm just going to respawn myself back onto the ship. So you can see that the ship is rapidly moving forward, and you can see more of the lifeboats are now being put overboard. The davits have gone from the vertical position to being lowered over the side. Now, what Captain Bartlett has, I think, done at this point, and we're just going to double check in the bridge. No, okay, I think we're still moving with momentum. Yeah, okay, we're on all stop. Now, part of the reason that the lifeboats were not to be... They were to be put over the side, but not lowered, will become apparent in... I'm stuck. I think I might have to... Oh no, I'm fine. Right, okay. I think I might have to respawn myself there. But yeah, so you can see that the lifeboats are now well over the side. And at this time, the captain is still deciding on the best course of action, because the inherent problem with a ship, or part of a ship being underwater, is that you can't assess it that easily. So really, you don't know the extent of the damage without doing a fair bit of investigation. So what's going to happen eventually, rather than me just waiting for it to happen? What's going to happen is the captain is going to see that the ship somewhat stabilizes, so similar to the Titanic. And if you watch my video on the Titanic video, you know there was a long period of time, close to an hour actually, where the ship almost didn't look like it was sinking. It was, but from an external perspective, it just looked like it was pretty stable in the water, as it was going down. So similarly, Captain Bartlett's obviously been quite worried about the rate of sinking there has been so far. As I said, the first 10 minutes of the sinking of the Britannic, and the Britannic was at the same state as the Titanic was 1 hour into its sinking. The ship is still listing, and it's now heeling forward as the weight of the water takes on a while longer. Jesus. The ship is taking on more weight at the bow as the sinking continues. But what's going to happen is it's going to stabilise somewhat, and Captain Bartlett is going to make a decision. And that decision is going to be, well, actually, we're not that far from Kea. It's just over there, you know, we can quite clearly make out the top of its mountains. So he's going to order the engines hard ahead, and he's going to attempt to beach the ship, because if the ship is beached, it's not going to sink, and that means they don't have to worry about getting into the lifeboats. Obviously, this is 1916. It's actually only been 4 years since the sinking of the Titanic, and that's not that long a time. There's a lot of fear and anxiety still surrounding that. Indeed, there's many people on board this ship, the Britannic, that have been on board the Titanic. They're survivors of the Titanic sinking. So, yeah. So we're just gonna head ourselves back, and this is where the timings start start to elude me somewhat. So now you can see some of the big davits in action. So you've seen the small davits, which were in use the same way as they were in the Titanic. But then you've got these big, massive davits, which can load multiple lifeboats, and they are currently lowering some of the lifeboats over the side. So they've now lowered it in position to be loaded, so people are now hopping on and going over here. Now the problem with a ship like this is that because the ship is listing to the starboard side, let's just jump over the edge again. Yeet. Oh, right, we're next to that vent. So you can see, well, you can't see, well, you can see up here that this ship is riveted. So what happens is the plates are pushed against each other. I'm just going to move away from this noisy thing. These ships are riveted, and as a lifeboat would come down the side of a listing ship, like if the ship is normal and the lifeboat is lowered, it never touches the side. But as the ship's list increases, the lifeboat has to scrape down the side of the listing ship, and those rivets can quite easily puncture holes into the lifeboats and cause the lifeboats to sink. So that panic was against the standing orders not to launch any lifeboats. One lifeboat was lowered into the water and launched, and it thankfully survived. But we will soon start to see that isn't always the case. So Captain Bartlett has now given the orders to try and reach the island, the Greek island of Kea. But the rudder's not working, or at least it's not working properly, so he's got no easy way of steering the ship. So he's ordered the port engine ahead full, he's ordered the central turbine engine ahead full, but the starboard engine has been ordered to not turn at all. And the reason why it's doing that is, if you imagine, you've got something sitting here, if you're only pushing it on one side, then it's turning. So he's basically using the engine to turn the ship without actually using the rudder, which is actually something that's still used today in jet engines. If one engine fails, if the hydraulics fail so you can't control the rudder, you can use the engines to steer. But the fact that he has now sent the ship forward presents a problem, because one of the lifeboats against instruction has launched, and it is now heading right into the path of the blades. And in this simulation, the lifeboat is empty. The sad reality is that it was full of people, and this ship had over 1,000 people on board when it sank. And thanks to a multitude of factors, which we'll talk about in more detail later, only 30 people died. And the 30 people that died in the initial explosion and getting chopped up when their lifeboat hit the propeller. So, as some more lifeboats are lowered, so at this point, I believe this has gone unnoticed by the ship's crew, and other than the people who have lowered the lifeboats. But what is happening is it's this fear that the lifeboats are going to get punctured by the ship as... Oh, hang on. I'm gonna have to... I don't know if I can... I'm gonna have to use some mad skills to try and get into this lifeboat. Yay! Oh, I've missed. Okay. Yeah. So obviously, this lifeboat was launched at the front. You can see the davits still in the water there. but the propellers are right at the back of the ship, and the fact it got chopped up was not noticed by the people on the bridge. So the standing order is for lifeboats to be filled and lowered, but not to be lowered into the water and not to be launched. So you can see that's exactly what's happening here. This lifeboat is coming out, and it's just hovering above the water. And despite the list of the ship, it's not in any danger of getting too close to the ship. But as you saw, these smaller davits, these are much closer to the ship, and so the person launching this lifeboat here has realised. Oh, I've just gone right over it. The person launching this lifeboat has panicked, dropped the ropes, and the lifeboat's still in the water. So everybody on board this lifeboat is... hang on, let's just try and get further back. Everyone on board this lifeboat is heading straight to the screws and, you know, getting quite worried about this predicament that's going to happen to them. And like the first lifeboat, it's struck and sunk. And at this point, Captain Bartlett is made aware that despite his orders, somebody is launching lifeboats. So he has very hurriedly called engines all stop. So you can see now the port engine and the turbine they've slowed down drastically. They're no longer going full speed. And as a third lifeboat has been dropped into the water, the blades are spinning to a stop. Oh, well, I didn't realise that happened. The blades are spinning to a stop, and that allows the people on board this third lifeboat, or rather the fourth lifeboat that's launched, but the third lifeboat heading towards the turbine, they lean over the edges and they push themselves away from the hull of the ship. So at this point, Captain Bartlett sounds the horn, first time, second time, third time, and then fourth time. And so he is now calling on everybody on board the ship to commence, it's 5 times, sorry, to go back to loading the lifeboats and getting ready to launch them into the sea. With the screws still now stopped, it is now safe to start launching the lifeboats. So we've already seen that some lifeboats are going over the port side, and indeed some lifeboats are going over the starboard side as well, and have been launched. I don't see where they are, but they've been launched, and you can see that there's more. I'm on the port. I've got confused about which direction I'm facing. So that was the port side where we were just on. So I'm looking aft. So yeah, this is the starboard side. So this is the bow of the ship over there, and yeah, you can see the ships coming over. So you see what I mean with the davits. With these huge davits, I can't get over the side of this. With these huge davits, the boats are so much further away from the vessels, the hull side. So whereas on the starboard side, you can see, if I hop up slightly, you can see that the boats are hanging away from the ship, but you can see how on the port side they would be hanging into the ship, and these big davits allow that you know, not for the boats not to be damaged by coming down the side of the ship. So unfortunately, yes, most of the people that died, we've witnessed the way most of the people died on board the Britannic when it sank. There were some people that were killed in the... What am I hearing? There were some people that were killed in the initial explosion, but many people died when those 2 lifeboats hit into the propeller on that port side engine. So at this point, the ship is stopped. Still probably got some momentum pushing it towards Kea, but Captain Bartlett has ordered the ship to resume evacuating. So we're just going to watch now how the big davits are loaded. So what happens here is you're going to have some sailors that are going to, well, the hooks aren't, oh no, are the hooks shown? So there's going to be a way of hooking the, let's see if we can't get on in. No, well, we kind of can, I guess. Yeah. Ah, for God's sake, I'm just trying to climb into a lifeboat. Yeah. So, oh yeah. So they are on the base in the lifeboat. I did think that their attention to detail wouldn't go that remiss. So you can see the large davits further back are currently being loaded with lifeboats. So what's going to happen is exactly as I've done, except maybe a little less ham-handedly. A sailor is going to have climbed in here. He's going to hook up this forward hook. He's going to hook up this rear hook, and the davit is going to be ready to be lifted. So let's hop off a second. And so the way that these big davits are controlled is through. Come on, you. Right, we're just hopping over here. We're literally Skyrim style on this. So you've got the these controls here, which can be used for wheeling, for controlling the davits. So let's head further back. So basically, we've seen how the davits are hooked on in, and they're brought over the side of the ship here. And this is actually one of the motor launches that they are. That they are bringing in. So I actually thought that they would hang it here to launch to because basically they would keep it. Oh, maybe they've already done it actually and I've been too late. Is that ship going? No. So this is one of the motor launches. So the Britannic had a number of these little motorized vehicles. And yeah, so this is just functioning as a lifeboat at the minute. The difference is it has an engine, so they don't need to row as much. So we're going to head back and we're going to look, hopefully, at this lifeboat being loaded. Because what they would do is they would bring the davit to a nearly vertical position, kind of as it is now, and they would lower it to the side of the boat so that it could be lowered, unless they would lower it up. Unless they would load it with people up here, but it'd be quite difficult to get into it, I imagine. I'm not too sure actually. I would have thought you would have. Whoops. Yeah. I would have thought it would have kind of come to the. Oh, I don't think I can get out. Hang on, where's not a lifeboat? Oh, okay, there we go. Yeah, okay, so it is just getting put over the edge and lowered. So they must load it. Actually up on those stands up there, although I'm not too sure on that detail. So what's happening now is the lifeboats are being lowered. We're just going to yeet ourselves in. We missed it, but whatever. So you can see now that we're starting to get quite a lot of lifeboats down, but most importantly, you can see that the ship is heeling forward quite significantly. The green stripe and the cross, or the red cross at the front, is now going underwater. And you can see from the smoke how we described the water getting into the boiler room, interacting with the hot coals, and the resultant steam coming out of funnels. You can see that's now happening in funnel 2, which is boiler rooms 3 and 4 and boiler rooms 1 and 2. Like the Titanic and the Olympic, the fourth funnel of the Britannic wasn't actually hooked up to anything. I think it might have been used as a steam vent, but it wasn't an engine funnel as the same way as the other ones were. It was literally just put there because its competitor ships had 4 funnels, and the perception at the time was funnels equals speed. So you can see with the ship healing massively and the lifeboats being lowered in, you can see the motor launches are going, and so some of the lifeboats are just you know, hovering around the place, because what's also happening is here, how I talked about the fears and anxieties of the Titanic sinking. The Titanic sinking caused a lot of fear amongst the soldiers and civilian staff, well, soldiers and medical staff on board the Britannic, and as a result of that, a lot of them at this point just started jumping off the ship into the water, and so some of the lifeboats were there pulling them over the sides and making sure that the boats were somewhat balanced before getting away to safety. So you can see some of the boats over there in the distance. You can now see that the turbine screw is coming out of the water because the ship is heeling so far forward, and it's listing to the port. So you can see here, this is it's listing to the starboard, and we're looking at the port engine, which is coming out of the water quite significantly. This is the drive shaft that goes all the way into the ship to connect it to the steam engines. So it had, like the Titanic and the Olympic, this ship had 2 ginormous reciprocating steam engine and 1 steam turbine powering the center one. It was made of brass, hence why it's all nice and shiny. So yes, the boats are continuing to be lowered, and as the ship lists more and more to the starboard, they realize that lowering the ships from the lifeboats from the small davits is too dangerous, because the ships are just going to rip apart on the davits. So lowering is continuing using the large davits up here, but the smaller ones, you can see they're over the side, but there's no attempt to try and lower them at this time. So let's hop back on board. So as with the Titanic, when it happens pretty quickly, but yeah, so let's head back over to the bridge and see the situation here. So if we go to the flying bridge and look down, you can see we're starting to get quite close to the water's edge at the bow. And so, for God's sake. So there were 3 factors that increased the sinking of the Britannic over the Titanic. So that's a nice and happy noise. So yeah, talking about the noise, the sounds of these ships is one of the things in the sinking of the Britannic and the sinking of the Titanic. The noises the ships made as they started to sink was kind of terrifying. The Britannic sank fast enough that it didn't break in two like the Titanic did. But even despite that, the sheer weight of the water, I don't know what the statistics was for the Britannic, but the Titanic at one point was sinking at something ridiculous, like 32,000 tons of water per minute or something. I can't remember what it was. It was a phenomenal volume of water was coming into the ship. So yeah, so these noises that you hear is just the ship groaning under the weights and pressures of the water. So what's now happening here? You just hear the engine order telegraph going. Captain Bartlett's happy that the ship has kind of stabilized for the minute, much like the Titanic did. And so what he has done, I believe, I'm hearing things. Yeah, so port engine to full. So what he now does for a final time is he says, right, okay, let's stop loading the lifeboats, let's stop launching the lifeboats, let's make one last attempt to get to Kea Island. And so for a final time, while he's still got some steam in the engines, he orders the engines full ahead and makes an attempt to get to Kea. His earlier efforts now mean the ship is pointing directly towards the island, and all he has to do is put the engines to full ahead in order to, get us going in that direction. And that actually would be one of the factors in which would cause the Britannic to sink faster than the Titanic. So as I mentioned before, there was 3. The first one was simply the scale of the damage. The Titanic was, a series of holes going across 6 different compartments. The Britannic is one huge hole, which allowed for massively increased rates of flooding. The second, as discussed, if we hop over here, was all the portholes that were open. Many of these across many of the decks were open, and so you can see here water would just be pouring into them and bringing it down further. And something similar did actually happen on the Titanic. So if you look at A, B, C, D deck, so this is roughly D deck. Might actually be already... Oh no, they're here. They're right here. So in the Titanic sinking, these doors, which normally allowed the passengers to board the ship, were opened because people from second class decks wanted to board the lifeboats as they were being lowered, and they were never shut again. So these doors being opened actually helped the sinking of the Titanic. Was it C deck or D deck? I forget now. I think it was D deck. But yeah, so they actually facilitated the Titanic sinking a lot quicker than it did. So from the outside of the ship, you can see now that the water is lapping on the deck just in front of the forecastle. We can almost just hop. We can very almost just hop aboard the ship again. So it's continuing to sink. It's continuing to. There we go. We did it. It's continuing to sink. It's continuing to groan and creak. But as I said, Captain Bartlett has ordered, and I don't know if this is actually shown in the. Why can't I get through here? I used to be able to get through here. How rude. Can I hop over that? No, I can't. Okay, I'm gonna have to do this the old way. So the water is rushing up, and looking at my timer, we don't have a great deal of time left before the ship sinks. And like I say, when it does start happening, it starts happening pretty damn quick. So I don't know if the bridge shows the engine order telegraphs correctly. No. I don't think. Maybe it does, and maybe I'm just misremembering what point it happens. In fact, there's an easy way to check, to be honest. Okay, there's no more lifeboats on this davit. Yeah, so lifeboats are still being lowered, so the order to restart the engines hasn't been given yet, and you can see that the second. No, where am I? Oh yeah, so the funnels have still got some oomph left in them. They've finished discharging steam. I think I may have given you some factually incorrect information. So the steam that we saw earlier wasn't the water entering the boiler rooms, although maybe in 5 and 6, but it would have been the steam being discharged from the vents. And the reason that they do that is, as we talked about before, as we talked about in the last video, sorry. When the engines are on, steam is being generated. That steam is being turned into energy for the engines and being sent to the engines, which they are being used. But when the engines aren't being used, the steam is being produced but isn't creating energy. So the steam builds and builds and builds and builds, and if you don't handle that situation correctly, you can get what's called a boiler explosion. And this has probably happened in like buildings and things. It happened a lot in railways. People would let their steam engines have too much boiler chest pressure and would blow. One of the most fatal incidents in maritime history was an American passenger steamship which suffered a boiler explosion. I believe something like 1,600 people died. I might be misquoting that one, but it was a boiler explosion that sank the ship in seconds, basically. Just tore the ship apart. So what happens in that case is, see these little pipes, front and rear, they can be used to vent the steam out of the steam chest in order to keep the steam chest pressure from getting too high and causing a boiler explosion. So that was what we were seeing when we saw the engines stop. So you can see our list is starting to increase quite a fair bit. And the situation on the bridge is still fine. So we are getting increasingly underwater. Actually, forget, there is a very easy way to check if the ship is moving forward, and that's the yeet button. So we're basically walking down the side of the Britannic. And you can see here that all the davits are either empty or they've now completely launched their lifeboats. So not every lifeboat on board the Britannic was launched, but yes, here we go. So the turbine is going, but the starboard engine is not. The port engine is, and the turbine engine is. So this is now pushing the ship towards Kea Island using what little steam chest pressure there is. You can see all the lifeboats that weren't launched. So yeah, they're now trying to push the ship towards Kea Island, but we're now missing slightly. So yeah, despite the fact that there are quite a lot of we'll do a tour. Hang on. Yes, okay, so before we do that, let's finish the point that we spotted. So the third and final point of why the Britannic sank faster than the Titanic did was because even though the engine order telegraphs aren't showing it, this ship is now moving forward at the fastest speed that it can achieve with its damage. And with the ship pointing down, the ship is pushing the bow forward into the water, which is now contributing to the ship. So if you think of it, the ship's engines point along the length of the ship, not along the length of the surface of the water. So if the ship is level, it's pushing the ship level. But if the ship's going down, it's technically pushing the ship down, and only the buoyancy is keeping the ship kind of from going down immediately, but it is contributing to the sinking, and that is a third and final factor. So part of the reason that only 30 people died, so there was 30 deaths and 38 injuries from the sinking of the Britannic, and you can see all of the lifeboats that just were simply not launched, including many on the big davits here, and they, despite that, there were 36 lifeboats from the Britannic that launched and stayed afloat. If you compare that to the Titanic, only 20 lifeboats did. So there's already like a huge capacity for survivability over the sinking of the Titanic. But we are getting towards the end. By my calculations, we have less than 10 minutes until the ship has sank, give or take a few minutes. And you can see here, the bow is underwater, and the rate of sinking is going to start increasing dramatically. And I'm going to let this run. I believe this will keep running if I go out, because I want to fact check something before I say it. So sorry that there's no audio at this time. What am I looking for? I am looking for some information about this ship's captain. It's Captain Bartlett. You can tell I'm just misspelling stuff here. No, it's not. It's not telling me to what I need. I don't think. Oh no, it is. Right, okay, I know what I'm saying now. So we've basically just seen a little bit of the water continuing to rise. So you can see very little of the paneling and stuff in the starboard side of the bow. You know, oh, you can actually just walk. So because this is, this isn't a game, this is an interactive museum experience, you can properly walk on water. And you can see here, you can really see the heel of the ship if we come a wee bit further out. Yeah, you can just look and see that the ship is going underwater quite quickly. The water is now starting to submerge the forecastle. So the forecastle is, you've got the bow, and then you've got a raised bit on the very top of the bow. That's the forecastle. This is, the place where Rose and Jack did their thing in that movie. And it is now starting to go underwater. But still the ship's engines are spinning as quickly as it can. I believe at this point Captain Bartlett won't know how many people have made it off onto the lifeboats in true maritime fashion of, not going down with it. So going down with the ship is, I think, a bit of a misnomer, but the captain is always responsible for his ship, and the captain must remain aboard the ship until every possible effort to get every other soul off the ship has been taken, at which point he may save himself. So Captain Bartlett and a few of his officers are diligently on the bridge doing what they can, trying to get the ship to beach. But as we can now see, we've gone from a 10-degree list, we're starting to get towards, a 30-40 degree list to that starboard side. And already the bow is alarmingly underwater, as it were. This is the one thing you really kind of don't want to be seeing when you're in charge of a ship like this. Fun fact, not fun fact, but like talking about the sinking of the RMS Titanic, one of the most senior officers to survive the sinking was Charles Lightoller, and when the Titanic sank, the water started flooding down this kind of ventilation shaft into the engine room, and he got pinned up against this grate. So let's forget that. So what's happening now? This is a long blast of the whistle. One long blast, and then we have another. So there's the second. So at the time, this is the maritime signal for all hands abandon ship, every man for yourself. So this is basically the point where anybody who is trying to keep the engines running, anything going, anybody beneath decks, get up and get off the boat, because Captain Bartlett has now seen that there is no saving the ship. There is no getting it to Kea Island. It is going down, and it is going down pretty damn hard. So you can hear the groaning of the ship, and you can see the water is coming up in a pretty rapid fashion. Yeah. So all of the lifeboats that are going to launch have more or less been launched, and even the hospital decks now, some of the wards are now starting to rapidly fill with water as the ship starts to sink. And I actually have to, I can't get out, I can't get out this way, so I'm just going to have to respawn myself because I'm stuck within this ship. So as I said, when it happens, it's going to happen really quickly, and indeed, that is the case. So we're going to do what Captain Bartlett actually did during the sinking. So we're a wee bit late for it because we had to respawn, but as the water came up, him and some of the officers that stayed with him simply walked. They simply walked into the water and swam away. They did not take a lifeboat. They just walked into the water and swam away. So the lifeboats are now kind of starting to pick up some of the survivors who did, people from the engine rooms that are now running up into the bridge and jumping in the water. They're all going to manage to get away, but the ship is now, you can see here, it's starting to go under, and you see this kind of bubbling here. So what's happening, and this is what we started talking about with the Charles Lightoller story when he got pushed up against the grate. The influx of water, really rapid influx of water into the ship, causes the air to be displaced, and in Charles Lightoller's cases, when the water breached the boiler room, it pushed all the air up and out the grate, and it blew him clear of the sinking Titanic. And in the same vein, we're starting to see that across the Britannic here. There's parts of the ship that are now infilling with water at an enormous rate. All of those vents that we looked at previously, they're now firmly underwater, and water is now pouring in those. And you can visibly see the rate of sinking is just extraordinary. And this funnel is going for a splash as the ship goes quite rapidly underwater. You can see all of the lifeboats that were still left on board, and they're designed in such a way, oh, there goes another funnel. They're designed in such a way that that some of them are just going to disconnect from the davits and float off. But now you're seeing a peculiarity of this sinking. I guess it's not really that peculiar, but the Britannic is 840 odd meters long, and it sank in 400 meters of water. So what's happened here is that the bow has already made contact with the sea floor, and the bow is not sinking anymore because it's already reached the sea floor, and yet the aft is still astern, kept up by the fact that it's filled with air and it's its buoyancy. However, it is still filling with water, and you can see here, you can see now that the list has increased to quite a heavy amount. The noises coming off the ship are just horrible, and these aren't just generic noises. You know, the team at Titanic Honor and Glory have done a lot of research into the sinking, and you can, these have been well timed as possible to coincide with the witness testimony of when all this happened. So the ship's now capsizing. It can't sink downwards anymore, so it's rolling over to its side. The list is now, pretty extreme. I don't even think we can walk on the deck anymore. No, we can't. The list is so incredibly extreme. And so it's going to basically roll all the way over. You can see the remaining lifeboats are now pedaling for their life away from the ship. Because when a ship goes underwater, so the way that you weigh a ship is in its displacement. Now, a ship displaces water based on what's underneath the waterline, more or less. And when it goes under the water, it's suddenly displacing. It's basically pulling a lot. It pulls a lot of water down with it as it goes underneath. That didn't really make any sense. Sorry. Yeah, basically, you know, you've got a large object that is displacing a lot of water, and as it moves underwater, the displaced water that comes around the ship gets to the aft of the ship, and then it refills the gap where the ship was a minute ago. And that creates a huge suction that if you're trapped in it, it can suck you down with the ship. There have been cases where it's happened and people have survived, and there's, you know, been cases where people obviously haven't. So basically you can see that the ship has almost completely changed direction. This list as it sinks is caused it to corkscrew its way underwater, and you can see the peculiar way in which it's moving as it goes increasingly underwater. It's just corkscrewing around. But now this is the final plunge. The last few pockets of places that weren't completely shafted with water are now quite rapidly filling. And within a few seconds, that's it. The HMHS Britannic has sunk. And you can see this whirlpool of disturbance as exactly what I was talking about before. You know, the water is rushing to fill the gap where the ship was, and it's creating this vortex going down, and eventually the water will settle and it's done and dusted, and we're now fading to black because that is the ship done. So we're getting a thing here. So yes, the 30 people that died, and we'll just pause and look at the names of the people who did pass away. And I'll just skip the credits because I'm just wary of too much of the music might give me a bit of a copyright strike. So yes, 30 people did lose their lives in this disaster, and you know, it was a huge ship with well over 1,000 people on board. And one of the things that I guess is noteworthy of talking about is why this sinking had 30 deaths, and the Titanic had, you know, over 1,500 deaths. Is there a daytime one? No, let's do a nighttime one, why not? And the reason for it is threefold. So let's just go ahead and put this into music off. Yeah, there we go. And we'll turn that down as well for just good measure. There were three key factors into why more people survived the sinking of the Britannic than they did the Titanic. And the first is obviously more lifeboats. The Titanic carried, what was it, 18 lifeboats plus 4 collapsibles, whereas the Britannic carried lots. So, you know, without adding them up, you've got 3 lifeboats here, 2, 5 plus a motor launch, and then 1 lifeboat and 1 collapsible at the back. So on this side alone, we've already got more lifeboats than the Titanic had. Oh, this is pretty. This is hella pretty. And That's the first reason why it was more survivable. And yes, only 36 of those lifeboats did manage to launch, but the Titanic only had 20 lifeboats for more than twice the amount of people that were on board the Titanic compared to the Britannic when it sank. The second factor was the temperature. The Titanic sank in... what was this? Oh, it's a light. The Titanic sank in the North Atlantic, where the air temperature was -2 degrees. The Britannic sank during daylight-ish. Well, yeah, it was morning, it was daylight, in the Mediterranean, where the temperature was 21 degrees. So people weren't going to be dying of hypothermia anytime soon. The Titanic was travelling, the Britannic was travelling on a route commonly used by the military, so with a couple of fishing boats from the local Greek islands who came out to help the survivors, they pulled a lot of the survivors out of the water, the ones that couldn't reach the lifeboats. And that help arrived a lot quicker than it did for the Titanic. The first British military ship to arrive at the sinking of the Britannic arrived 2 hours after the Britannic sank in, let's face it, favourable conditions. The Titanic help was 3.5 hours away in -2 degree air temperature, where a lot of the passengers simply froze to death. So as we discussed throughout that video, most of the deaths happen, as far as I know, all of the deaths happened as a result of the initial explosion and the initial flooding, and when those 2 lifeboats hit the screws as it went under. And again, there was a lot of panic and a lot of anxiety surrounding the sinking of the Britannic, because people had in their minds the relatively recent sinking of the Titanic and how many people died there. And between that and the list, that's what prompted the people launching the lifeboats on the port side to launch their lifeboats against the captain's orders. And the poor captain, he had no idea that the lifeboats were being launched. So, you know, they hit the screws, and a lot of people passed away that way, which was, you know, very unfortunate. This is a beautiful ship at night, isn't it? So I guess there's 2 things I never really got a chance to cover, and by that I mean 2 people, and my memory is a wee bit hazy, so it might even be 1 person, I can't quite remember. But there was 1 person, first name Violet, I forget her surname, who holds the very unfortunate distinction of having been on board the Titanic, the RMS Titanic, when it sank, and she survived it. She was on board the RMS Olympic when it crashed with the HMS Hawk and suffered damage to its ship, but thankfully stayed afloat. She was on board at that time, and she was also on board and survived the sinking of the HMHS Britannic as well. The second person, and I honestly can't remember if this is the same person or not, but this was another survivor of the Titanic disaster, and she was very instrumental in saving some people's lives, because what she did was she learned lessons from the Titanic. So what happened when the Titanic sank was it was cold, and people knew it was cold, so they put their jackets on, and then they put their life vests on top of the jackets. So when they hit the water, their jackets became sodden with water and dragged them underneath. And it took a long time, and in many cases too long, for them to get their life jacket off, get their jacket off, and then get their life jackets back on. By that point, they were submerged, so the ones that did survive died of hypothermia, and the ones that couldn't get their jackets off in time drowned. she remembered the lessons from that, and she told everyone to take their jackets off, put your life jacket on, and then put your jacket on top of that if you think you're going to be cold. And there was a bit of a humorous incident. She did survive, but she realised a wee bit too late into the sinking of the Britannic that she had ignored her own advice and put her life jacket on top of her actual jacket, and it became sodden. But thankfully she did survive. So yes, this is a nice tranquil look at the Britannic in nighttime, in its wartime configuration, with all these hospital beds, you know, and it's this is a nice way of you know, remembering the Britannic, and it's a very powerful tribute to those who did lose their lives in this First World War incident. You know, doctors, nurses, crewmen who were, you know, trying to help those injured in the war, and sadly, you know, became casualties of it. And so you have this lovely little kind of tranquil look at the Britannic, and I think a nice point for us to end this video on. So this has been Britannic, Patroness of the Mediterranean. You can buy this game for your very well, I say game, it's an interactive museum experience, and you can buy it for your very own. It is available on Steam at the link below, and I strongly suggest following the Titanic Honour and Glory team. As I said at the start of this video, all of their links, their website and YouTube channel are in the description below. But as I said at the start, not only are they making a game of even better standards than this, like, you know, in this ship only a few areas are explorable, but the Titanic Honour and Glory has got the entire ship that's explorable in extreme, phenomenal detail. It's breathtaking. The recreation of the Titanic they've been able to create, but on top of being top-class developers, they are also amazing historians, and they have created a team really dedicated to the history of the Titanic and the White Star liners in general, and they produce a lot of documentaries. So they produced a documentary on the sinking of the RMS Titanic, the RMS Britannic, the RMS Atlantic. They've got amazing videos on all of those, incredibly informative, incredibly detailed. Indeed, most of what I know about the sinking of Britannic comes from their work, so I literally cannot recommend them highly enough. Whether or not you want to play the game or you're just interested in the subject matter, give them a follow. You'll find it amazingly interesting, and I wish them all the best in their development of Titanic and Honour and Glory. But for just now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to say thank you very much for watching this video, and I will see you next time. Bye.